Sylvia Kensington built a $3 billion empire, but a tragic accident left her paralyzed and notoriously cruel. Her executive assistants never lasted more than 5 days. They ran out crying. Then came Arthur, a desperate single dad who didn't just survive her impossible demands. He uncovered the terrifying conspiracy inside her penthouse. The 64th floor of the Kensington Spire in downtown Manhattan was affectionately referred to by corporate employees as the guillotine. It was here that Sylvia Kensington, founder and CEO of Kensington Holdings, ruled her global real estate empire from a custom-built, motorized titanium wheelchair. Before the accident, a catastrophic pileup on the FDR Drive 3 years prior that shattered her T12 vertebrae, Sylvia had been a formidable force of nature. She was known for walking into boardrooms and dismantling corporate acquisitions with a terrifying, icy precision. After the accident, the precision remained, but the ice had turned into pure, unrelenting venom. Stripped of her physical autonomy, Sylvia asserted control the only way she knew how, by breaking the spirits of everyone on her personal staff. In the span of 6 months, she had gone through 14 executive assistants. Some lasted 4 days. One young woman, an Ivy League graduate with a spotless resume, lasted exactly 42 minutes before Sylvia's brutal critique of her breathing patterns sent her sobbing to the elevators. Arthur Pendleton didn't know any of this when he walked into the gleaming glass and steel lobby. He only knew 2 things. The salary for the executive personal aide position was $140,000 a year, and his 6-year-old daughter, Lily, was running out of time. Arthur was 32, a former logistics manager whose life had derailed when his wife passed away from an aggressive lymphoma, leaving him with crushing medical debt and a grieving toddler. Recently, Lily had developed severe chronic asthma, exacerbated by the black mold hidden behind the drywall of their cheap, damp basement apartment in Queens. Arthur needed first and last month's rent for a clean, safe apartment near Mount Sinai Hospital, and he needed it yesterday. When Arthur stepped off the elevator on the 64th floor, he was greeted by Caroline, the exhausted HR director for Kensington Holdings. She looked at his slightly frayed charcoal suit and sighed. "Mr. Pendleton, I'm going to be completely transparent with you," Caroline said, leading him down a silent, carpeted hallway. "You are highly overqualified in logistics, but completely unqualified in personal care and high-level executive assistance. And frankly, Miss Kensington will likely tear you to shreds. She does not like men in this role. She does not like people who hesitate, and she absolutely despises pity. Are you sure you want to subject yourself to this?" "I have a daughter," Arthur said simply, his voice steady. "I'm immune to tantrums, and I'm desperate. Put me in." Caroline offered a grim smile, tapped a code into a heavy oak door, and pushed it open. Godspeed. Sylvia Kensington's office was cavernous, surrounded by floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the gray expanse of the city. Sylvia sat behind a massive slab of black marble, her back to the door. She didn't turn around. "I wanted my espresso 3 minutes ago." A voice cut through the air, sharp as a scalpel. "If you are the new meat from HR, you are already failing." Arthur didn't flinch. He walked slowly toward the desk. "I'm Arthur Pendleton. I wasn't informed about the espresso, but if you tell me how you take it and where the machine is, the next one will be exactly on time." Sylvia spun her chair around with a mechanical whir. Arthur felt a momentary jolt. She was striking sharp cheekbones, piercing blue eyes, and impeccably tailored in a slate-gray blazer, but her face was drawn, deeply lined with chronic pain and exhaustion. Her legs, hidden beneath a cashmere blanket, were motionless. She looked him up and down, her expression souring. "A man. Caroline is sending me men now." "What's the matter, Arthur? Couldn't cut it in the real corporate world, so you decided to play nursemaid?" "I managed supply chains for international freight across 3 continents," Arthur replied, his tone conversational, completely ignoring the insult. "I'm here because this job pays double what my last one did, and my daughter needs a better home. You need someone who won't break down crying when you raise your voice. It sounds like a mutually beneficial arrangement. Sylvia's eyes narrowed. She wasn't used to pushback. She was used to trembling hands and stammering apologies. She reached for a thick, leather-bound dossier on her desk, a quarterly financial report, and with a sudden, violent swipe of her arm, sent it crashing to the floor, papers scattering everywhere. "Pick it up," she ordered, her voice a low, dangerous hiss, "and collate it. Perfectly. You have 2 minutes." It was a blatant power play, designed to humiliate. A test of submission. Arthur looked at the papers, then looked at Sylvia. He didn't scramble to his knees. He didn't apologize. Instead, he unbuttoned his suit jacket, draped it neatly over a nearby chair, and calmly knelt down. He gathered the papers with practiced, methodical efficiency. "My daughter throws her cereal bowl on the floor when she's frustrated she can't tie her shoes," Arthur said quietly as he stacked the pages, checking the page numbers. "I usually make her help me clean it up, but since you're paying me handsomely, I'll handle this one." The silence in the room became incredibly dense. Sylvia stared at him, her chest rising and falling rapidly. For a second, Arthur thought she was going to scream for security. Instead, the corners of her mouth twitched. It wasn't a smile, but it wasn't a death sentence either. Arthur stood, tapped the stack of papers against the desk to perfectly align the edges, and set them down precisely where they had been before. "Now," he said, "about that espresso." Sylvia maintained eye contact for 3 long seconds. Dark roast, no sugar, a single drop of oat milk. "The machine is in the private kitchenette behind you. If it's burnt, you're fired." Arthur nodded, turning toward the kitchenette. He had survived the first 10 minutes. The legend of Sylvia Kensington's cruelty was not exaggerated. It was, in fact, understated. Arthur's first 3 days were a grueling gauntlet designed to break his mind and body. His shift started at 4:30 a.m. at Sylvia's sprawling Upper East Side penthouse on 5th Avenue. He was responsible for everything, coordinating with her private nursing staff, for her morning physical therapy, managing her incredibly complex global schedule across 4 time zones, filtering her emails, and acting as her physical proxy in the office. Sylvia was relentless. She demanded that he memorize the names, faces, and net worths of the entire Kensington Holdings Board of Directors by noon of his first day. When he accidentally brought her a folder with a blue label instead of a green one, she berated him for 10 solid minutes, questioning his literacy and cognitive function. But Arthur had a superpower that the 20-something Ivy League graduates before him lacked, the hardened patience of a single parent. When Sylvia screamed, Arthur heard the underlying translation. She wasn't angry about the blue label. She was in agonizing neuropathic pain from her spinal injury, a pain she fiercely hid from her corporate rivals. On Wednesday afternoon, the tension reached a boiling point. Kensington Holdings was in the final stages of acquiring a major competitor, a deal worth hundreds of millions. A virtual board meeting was scheduled, and Sylvia was already in a foul mood, her hands trembling slightly as she tried to adjust the cashmere blanket over her legs. Arthur was standing by the door, holding a tablet with the meeting agenda. "My posture is wrong," Sylvia snapped, glaring at her reflection in the darkened monitor. "Fix the cushion, quickly, before they log on. And don't hover." Arthur stepped forward and gently adjusted the lumbar support behind her back. "Better?" "It's fine," she clipped. "During this meeting, I need you out of frame, but close enough to hand me the Q3 projections the second Richard Hawthorne opens his mouth. Hawthorne is a vulture. He thinks because my legs don't work, my brain is rotting. He's going to try to stall the acquisition." The screen blinked to life, and a grid of wealthy, serious faces appeared. Richard Hawthorne, an older man with silver hair and a condescending smile, sat in the center square. The meeting was a bloodbath. For 40 minutes, Hawthorne subtly undermined every point Sylvia made, framing his insults as concerns for her health and capacity to oversee such a massive merger. "Sylvia, darling," Hawthorne said, his voice dripping with faux sympathy, "we all admire your tenacity, we really do, but the travel required for this integration, Perhaps it's time we consider appointing a co-CEO? Someone to handle the physical demands? Arthur watched Sylvia's hands grip the armrests of her wheelchair so tightly, her knuckles turned white. The insult was profound. She opened her mouth to fire back, but a sudden spasm of pain shot through her spine, causing her to wince and lose her breath for a crucial fraction of a second. Hawthorne saw the wince. His smile widened. He was winning. Arthur didn't hesitate. Moving smoothly just out of camera range, he placed a glass of water on her desk, deliberately knocking over a heavy metal pen cup in the process. The loud clatter startled everyone on the call. "Apologies, Miss Kensington," Arthur said in a loud, clear, unapologetic voice. "The Q3 European logistics reports you requested just finished printing. You were right, Mr. Hawthorne's division is underperforming by 14%, directly contradicting the figures he submitted yesterday." He slid a completely blank piece of paper into her field of vision, tapping a specific spot on the empty page. Sylvia didn't miss a beat. She seamlessly picked up the cue, her eyes locking onto the blank paper as if reading damning evidence. The wince vanished, replaced by a terrifying, predatory calm. "Thank you, Arthur," Sylvia said, her voice dropping an octave. She looked directly into the camera at Hawthorne. "Richard, it seems my assistant has just handed me the real logistics numbers from your sector. I was going to save this for private review, but since we are discussing capacity, let's discuss your capacity to manage basic supply chains without hemorrhaging company funds." Hawthorne's face went pale. The rest of the board suddenly sat up straighter. The dynamic instantly shifted. Sylvia completely dismantled Hawthorne over the next 20 minutes, securing the board's unanimous vote for the acquisition. When the screen finally went black, the silence in the office was deafening. Sylvia sat motionless for a long time. Then, she turned her chair slightly to look at Arthur. "There were no European logistics reports," she said quietly. "No, ma'am," Arthur replied, gathering the water glass. "But he didn't know that. And bullies only understand leverage." Sylvia studied him. For the first time since he had met her, the bitter, guarded walls in her eyes lowered just a fraction. "You lied to my board of directors. If he had called your bluff, you would have humiliated me." "He was never going to call the bluff," Arthur said, looking her in the eye. "He's a coward who attacks people when he thinks they're in pain. I know the type." "Why did you do it?" she asked. "Because my job is to assist you," Arthur said softly. "And you needed assistance." That evening, after Sylvia had been transferred to her bed by the night nurse, Arthur remained in the penthouse to organize the home office. He was exhausted, his feet aching, desperate to get back to Queens to check on Lily and relieve the babysitter. He was filing away the week's medical receipts, a mundane task, when he noticed an anomaly. Arthur had spent years in logistics. He was trained to spot discrepancies in spreadsheets and manifests. Looking at the invoices from Sylvia's private pharmacy, something didn't add up. Sylvia was prescribed a highly specific low-dose nerve blocker to manage her spinal pain without causing grogginess. But according to the intake logs signed by Sylvia's head of private security, a man named Brody, the dosage being delivered was 3 times the prescribed amount. Furthermore, there was a secondary medication listed, a heavy, controversial muscle relaxant known to cause severe cognitive fog and physical lethargy. It wasn't on Sylvia's chart from her primary physician. Arthur frowned, pulling up the digital files on the office computer. He cross-referenced the pharmacy deliveries with Sylvia's private medical schedule. The days Sylvia experienced her worst physical spasms, the days she was incredibly irritable, and the days Hawthorne specifically chose to attack her in board meetings, all perfectly aligned with the dates the heavy muscle relaxants were signed for by security. Someone was intentionally over-medicating the CEO of Kensington Holdings to make her appear unstable and physically deteriorating. Arthur's blood ran cold. He looked at the closed door of Sylvia's bedroom. She wasn't just a bitter woman fighting her own broken body. She was a billionaire trapped in a penthouse, surrounded by people she paid, and someone was slowly, methodically poisoning her. Arthur slipped the pharmacy invoices into his briefcase. He couldn't go to HR. He couldn't go to the police, yet he had no proof of who was administering it. He was just the new assistant, the guy who wasn't supposed to last the week. If he spoke up now, he'd be fired, or worse. But if he did nothing, Sylvia Kensington was going to lose her company and possibly her life. The N-train ride back to Queens was a blur of rattling metal and fluorescent lights. Arthur sat clutching his briefcase, the pharmacy invoices burning a hole through the cheap leather. When he finally unlocked the door to his basement apartment, the smell of damp drywall and mildew hit him like a physical blow. He paid Mrs. Higgins, the elderly neighbor who watched Lily, and crept into the tiny bedroom. Lily was asleep, a nebulizer mask resting on the nightstand next to a worn-out stuffed bear. Her breathing was shallow, punctuated by a wet, rattling cough that tore at Arthur's heart. He looked at his daughter, then at the stolen invoices on his kitchen table. Arthur wasn't a detective, he was a logistics guy. His entire career had been built on tracking shipments from Shenzhen to Seattle, identifying bottlenecks, and eliminating inefficiencies in global supply chains. But looking at these papers, the logic was exactly the same. Someone is moving unauthorized product from point A to point B. The next morning at 4:30 a.m., Arthur walked into the sprawling Upper East Side penthouse with a hyper-focused clarity. He needed to understand the exact workflow of Sylvia's morning routine. At 6:00 a.m., the day nurse, Beatrice, arrived. Beatrice was a stern, humorless woman who moved with clinical detachment. At 6:15 a.m., Brody, the head of private security, a broad-shouldered former PMC contractor with cold, dead eyes, unlocked the medical safe in the pantry. Arthur pretended to be engrossed in organizing Sylvia's emails on his iPad, but he was watching their reflection in the stainless steel refrigerator doors. He watched Brody hand Beatrice the standard morning blister pack of gabapentin and baclofen. But then, Brody slipped a secondary, unmarked pillbox into Beatrice's hand. Beatrice nodded, went to the blender, and dropped the extra, powdery contents into Sylvia's kale and spirulina smoothie. Arthur's heart hammered against his ribs. The supply chain was compromised at the final mile. When Beatrice turned her back to wash her hands, Arthur made his move. He deliberately knocked his elbow against a stack of porcelain plates on the counter. The deafening crash shattered the morning silence. Beatrice jumped, whirling around with a gasp. "I am so sorry," Arthur stammered, dropping to his knees to gather the broken shards. "My foot caught the edge of the rug. Please, I've got this." "Watch what you're doing, you idiot," Beatrice hissed, distracted by the mess. In the 3 seconds her eyes were off the counter, Arthur reached up, grabbed the laced smoothie glass, and swapped it with an identical glass of plain green juice he had poured from the fridge a minute earlier. He slid the laced drink behind the heavy espresso machine. 10 minutes later, Sylvia Kensington rolled into the dining room. She looked exhausted, the dark circles under her eyes stark against her pale skin. She drank the unlaced juice without a word, staring blankly at the financial news on the television. Arthur quietly retrieved the laced smoothie, poured it into a sterilized travel thermos, and tucked it into his briefcase. During his lunch break, he didn't eat. Instead, he took a cab to a private toxicology lab on 3rd Avenue, a place he knew from his corporate freight days that tested commercial truck drivers. He paid $800 out of his own shallow pocket to rush the results. Bidva, 00 p.m. back at the Kensington Spire. The change in Sylvia was terrifying. Without the heavy sedatives clouding her system, her mind was razor sharp, but her body was in agony. The baseline nerve blockers weren't enough. She was sweating through her silk blouse, her hands trembling violently as she tried to type an email. Arthur walked into her office and quietly closed the heavy oak door. "Arthur," Sylvia gritted out, her voice tight with pain. "Call Beatrice. Tell her I need my breakthrough pain medication. Now, my spine feels like it's submerged in battery acid." "I can't do that, Miss Kensington," Arthur said evenly, stepping closer to her desk. Sylvia's head snapped up, her blue eyes flashing with a furious, unadulterated rage. "Excuse me? You are an assistant. You do not dictate my medical care. Get the nurse, or you are fired. You've fired 14 people, Sylvia. You can fire me tomorrow, Arthur said, dropping the formalities. He pulled his chair up to her desk and sat down, eye level with her. But right now, you need to listen to me. Your morning smoothie was laced. It's been laced for months. Someone is deliberately drugging you to keep you docile, confused, and pliable. Sylvia stared at him, the anger slowly draining from her face, replaced by a profound, chilling shock. What are you talking about? You feel terrible today because you are going through acute chemical withdrawal, Arthur explained gently. I swapped your drink this morning. I took the original to a lab. He pulled out his phone, showing her the expedited digital toxicology report. They found massive doses of carisoprodol soma. It's a heavy-duty muscle relaxant. Combined with your regular nerve medication, it acts as a severe cognitive depressant. It causes brain fog, memory loss, and lethargy. Whoever is doing this knows exactly how to keep you just functional enough to look incompetent, but not dead. Sylvie read the script. Her breathing grew shallow. The billionaire CEO, the terror of Wall Street, suddenly looked very small in her titanium wheelchair. Beatrice, she whispered. Beatrice is the delivery mechanism, Arthur corrected. Brody is the distributor. But neither of them has the motive or the money to orchestrate this. Brody is being paid by someone else. I need you to trust me for 24 hours to find the supplier. Can you hold on through the pain without tipping them off? Sylvia closed her eyes. A tear, just one, escaped and rolled down her cheek. She wiped it away furiously with the back of her trembling hand. When she opened her eyes again, the vulnerability was gone. Only ice remained. Find the supplier, Arthur, she whispered, her voice laced with venom. Find out who is doing this to me, and then we are going to burn them to the ground. The next 48 hours were a masterclass in corporate espionage, driven entirely by a logistics manager from Queens. Arthur needed a paper trail. He knew that illicit operations of this scale required funding, and funding always left a footprint. Late Thursday night, while Sylvia feigned a drug-induced sleep in the penthouse, Arthur sat at her private computer terminal. He used Sylvia's highest-level administrative clearance to audit the personal security budget. Brody's salary was standard, but Arthur, accustomed to auditing complex shipping manifests, noticed a series of bizarre equipment maintenance fees billed to a third-party vendor called Zenith Solutions. Zenith Solutions was a ghost. No website, no physical address, just a P.O. box in Delaware. Arthur dug deeper. He accessed the building's secure freight logs. He cross-referenced the dates. Zenith Solutions was paid, with the dates unauthorized packages arrived at the loading dock, addressed directly to Brody. The packages originated from a private pharmaceutical compounder in New Jersey. But who owned Zenith? Arthur leaned on a favor. He called Greg, an old buddy who now worked compliance for a major corporate bank. Greg, I need a massive favor. I need the registered signatory for a Delaware LLC called Zenith Solutions. Don't ask why. An hour later, Greg called back. Arthur, this is highly classified, so you didn't hear it from me. Zenith Solutions is a shell. The primary funding flows from an offshore account at Cayman National Bank. The beneficiary of that account is a trust fund registered to a Mrs. Eleanor Hawthorne. Arthur's blood ran cold. Eleanor Hawthorne, Richard Hawthorne's wife. The pieces clicked together with sickening precision. Hawthorne couldn't force Sylvia out legally without a massive board battle. But if he could manufacture a medical decline, if he could document a steady deterioration of her mental faculties, he could invoke the company's emergency medical proxy clause. He was slowly poisoning her to steal a $3 billion empire. The next morning, Arthur arrived at the penthouse at his usual 4:30 a.m. He felt a tense knot in his stomach. He had the proof, but he was walking a tightrope over a very deep drop. As he stepped out of the elevator into the private vestibule, a massive hand grabbed him by the lapels of his cheap suit and slammed him hard against the marble wall. Arthur gasped for air, the breath knocked out of his lungs. Brody stood over him, his face inches away, eyes dead and unblinking. "You're a very curious guy, Arthur," Brody growled softly, his grip tightening. "I saw you snooping around the freight manifests yesterday. I see you typing on the boss's computer at 2:00 a.m. You're a logistics manager, right? You should know that poking around other people's supply lines is a good way to get your own cut." Brody leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "I'd hate for something to happen to your supply lines. How's that basement apartment on 34th Street? You know, Astoria is a rough neighborhood. Lots of respiratory issues for little kids. Lily, isn't it? It would be a tragedy if her asthma got worse because her dad couldn't stop playing detective." A primal, terrifying fear spiked through Arthur's chest. His first instinct was to beg, to swear he knew nothing. But then he remembered the sound of Lily's rattling cough. He remembered Sylvia's trembling hands. Arthur forced himself to look Brody dead in the eye. He didn't blink. "My daughter is fine, Brody," Arthur said, his voice surprisingly steady, though his heart was hammering. "But if you ever mention her name again, I promise you, the people I used to work with at the Port Authority will find a shipping container for you that won't be opened until it reaches the bottom of the Mariana Trench. Now let me go. Miss Kensington needs her coffee." For a split second, doubt flickered in Brody's eyes. He didn't know Arthur's background. He didn't know if Arthur was bluffing. Slowly, Brody released his grip, stepping back with a cold smirk. "Just do your job, Arthur, and nothing else." Arthur walked into the penthouse, his hands shaking so badly he had to hide them in his pockets. He went straight to Sylvia's bedroom. She was awake, staring at the ceiling, fighting the agony in her spine. Arthur locked the door behind him and pulled out the printed dossier. "It's Hawthorne," Arthur said quietly, laying the papers on her lap. "He's funding Brody through a shell company in his wife's name. They are bringing in the carisoprodol from New Jersey. He's building a medical file to invoke the proxy clause and strip you of the CEO title." Sylvia read the documents. She read Greg's notes. She traced the wire transfers with a perfectly manicured finger. The silence in the room was heavy, oppressive. When she finally looked up, Arthur expected to see despair. Instead, he saw the apex predator that had built Kensington Holdings from the ground up. "Brody just threatened my daughter," Arthur added, his voice hard. "He knows I'm looking." Sylvia's eyes locked onto his. "Arthur, how much is the first and last month's rent for the apartment you want near Mount Sinai?" Arthur blinked, thrown by the question. $14,000. Why? Sylvia picked up her phone and tapped a few buttons. A second later, Arthur's phone buzzed in his pocket. It was a banking alert. An immediate wire transfer of $500,000 had just hit his checking account. "Move your daughter today," Sylvia commanded, her voice vibrating with authority. "Hire private security for her. Put her in the best hotel in the city until you find a place. Because by Monday morning, Richard Hawthorne and his attack dog are going to regret the day they were born." "What's the play?" Arthur asked, a fierce grin spreading across his face despite the adrenaline. "The annual shareholder summit is this Monday," Sylvia said, her mind already moving 1,000,000 miles a minute. "Hawthorne is going to make his move there. He thinks I'm broken. He thinks I'm a zombie. We are going to let him believe it. You are going to let Brody lace my drink all weekend. You are going to let them think they have won." "Sylvia, the withdrawal, the pain," Arthur protested. "I have survived a shattered spine, Arthur. I can survive 3 days of brain fog to trap a rat," she said fiercely. "On Monday, Hawthorne will call for an emergency medical vote in front of 500 shareholders and the press. He will present his concerns. And when he does," Sylvia smiled, and it was the most terrifying, beautiful thing Arthur had ever seen, "you are going to hand me the real supply chain report." The weekend was a harrowing descent into controlled chaos. Arthur had immediately relocated Lily to a secure suite at the Plaza Hotel, flanked by 2 off-duty NYPD detectives he hired using Sylvia's funds. Knowing his daughter was safe, Arthur returned to the penthouse to oversee the most dangerous logistics operation of his life. Sylvia had to play the victim, which meant allowing Beatrice and Brody to drug her. However, Arthur meticulously managed the supply line. He intercepted her meals, siphoning off just enough of the carisoprodol so she exhibited the physical symptoms of heavy sedation without fully losing her cognitive faculties. It was agonizing to watch. For 48 hours, the billionaire CEO slurred her words, drooped in her chair, and let Brody sneer at her behind her back. Arthur sat in the shadows of the penthouse, playing the role of the terrified, submissive assistant, silently cataloging every smirk and every whispered exchange between the security chief and the nurse. Monday morning arrived like a thunderclap. The Kensington Holdings annual shareholder summit was being held in the grand ballroom of the Pierre Hotel. 500 major investors, board members, and financial journalists filled the opulent space, buzzing with rumors of the CEO's failing health. Arthur wheeled Sylvia into the ballroom. She wore a striking crimson blazer, but she slouched in her chair, her chin resting near her chest, eyes half closed. Beatrice walked on her left, carrying a medical bag, while Brody loomed on her right, his chest puffed out in a tailored suit paid for by Hawthorne's blood money. Richard Hawthorne took the stage. The massive screens behind him displayed the Kensington Holdings logo. He gripped the podium, looking out over the crowd with an expression of deeply manufactured sorrow. "Ladies and gentlemen, shareholders, and esteemed colleagues," Hawthorne began, his voice echoing through the silent room. "We are here to celebrate another year of unprecedented growth. But today it is my solemn, heartbreaking duty to address the elephant in the room. We all revere Sylvia Kensington. She is a titan. But the tragic reality of her physical condition has, sadly, begun to exact a terrible toll on her cognitive stamina." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Cameras flashed. "For months, the board has watched her struggle," Hawthorne continued, gesturing vaguely toward where Sylvia sat motionless. "Her memory lapses, her erratic behavior, her chronic fatigue. It breaks our hearts. Therefore, for the survival of the empire she built, I am formally invoking Article 14, Section B of our corporate charter, the emergency medical proxy. I am asking the board to vote, right here and now, to transition Sylvia Kensington to Chairman Emeritus and install a new CEO." Brody smirked. Beatrice looked at the floor. "It was the perfect corporate assassination." "Sylvia," Hawthorne said softly, leaning into the microphone. "Do you have anything you wish to say? Or shall we proceed?" For a long, agonizing moment, Sylvia didn't move. Hawthorne's smile widened. He had won. Then Arthur stepped forward. He didn't look like a frayed, desperate, single dad from Queens anymore. He stood tall, his posture rigid with the authority of a man who controlled the room's entire supply chain. He reached down and adjusted the control panel on Sylvia's chair. With a mechanical hum, the titanium wheelchair motorized backward, pulling Sylvia away from Beatrice and Brody. Then, the chair's hydraulics activated, lifting Sylvia into a perfectly upright, commanding posture. Sylvia raised her head. Her eyes snapped open. There was no fog. There was no droop. There was only the terrifying apex predator glare that had conquered Wall Street. "Thank you, Richard, for your touching eulogy." Sylvia's voice rang out, crystal clear and sharp as a diamond cutting glass. The microphone on her lapel amplified her commanding tone, instantly silencing the murmurs. "However, reports of my mental decline have been greatly and criminally exaggerated." Hawthorne's fake smile froze. Brody took a sudden, aggressive step forward, but Arthur immediately blocked his path, unbuttoning his suit jacket. "I wouldn't," Arthur murmured, locking eyes with the massive security chief. "Arthur, if you would be so kind as to present the revised quarterly logistics," Sylvia commanded, not taking her eyes off Hawthorne. Arthur pulled a remote from his pocket and clicked it. The Kensington logo on the massive screens behind Hawthorne vanished. In its place appeared a sprawling, undeniable web of financial and medical documents. The crowd gasped as the Cayman National Bank wire transfers to Zenith Solutions flashed on the screen, explicitly tied to Eleanor Hawthorne's trust fund. Beside it, the expedited toxicology report from the 3rd Avenue lab highlighted the massive, unauthorized doses of carisoprodol in bright red. "What is this?" Hawthorne sputtered, his face draining of color. "This is an outrage. This is fabricated nonsense from a disgruntled assistant. It is a fully authenticated audit trail." Arthur's voice boomed over the room's PA system, having synced his headset to the AV booth. "Tracking illicit pharmaceuticals purchased through a shell company, authorized by you, Richard, and administered by Beatrice and Brody to systematically poison your CEO." Pandemonium erupted in the ballroom. Journalists scrambled, typing furiously. Investors shouted. Brody realized the game was up. He lunged toward Arthur, intending to smash his way to the service exit. But Arthur had spent his morning making highly specific phone calls. Before Brody could take a second step, the ballroom doors swung open. A dozen plainclothes officers from the NYPD's financial crimes and major case squads flooded the room. Arthur had handed them the entire dossier at 6:00 a.m., neatly organized with exactly the kind of undeniable, perfectly documented supply chain logic that prosecutors dreamed of. "Richard Hawthorne, you are under arrest for corporate espionage, conspiracy, and the intentional poisoning of Sylvia Kensington," the lead detective announced, pulling Hawthorne from the stage. Across the room, officers slammed Brody against a banquet table, cuffing him alongside a weeping Beatrice. Sylvia sat perfectly still in her chair, watching the architect of her suffering being led away in handcuffs. The flashbulbs were blinding now, capturing the triumphant, unbroken billionaire who had just executed the most spectacular counter-coup in corporate history. When the chaos finally began to subside, Sylvia turned her wheelchair to face Arthur. The icy, cruel exterior that had terrorized 14 previous assistants was gone. In its place was a look of profound, unconditional respect. "I believe you need a new title, Arthur," Sylvia said quietly, the faintest hint of a genuine smile touching her lips. "Assistant seems vastly insufficient for someone who just saved my life and my company. How does Chief Operating Officer sound? It comes with a corner office, a terrifying amount of power, and enough salary to buy that apartment building in Queens 10 times over." Arthur looked at the billionaire, thinking of Lily breathing easily in a clean, safe room. He offered a small, exhausted but triumphant smile. "I'll take it, miss." "Kensington," Arthur replied. "But I'm still making the espresso. You fire anyone else who tries." If Arthur and Sylvia's fight against corporate betrayal kept you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button. Share this incredible true story of loyalty and justice with your friends. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more jaw-dropping real-life dramas and untold secrets from the hidden world of billionaires. Drop a comment below. What would you have done in Arthur's shoes? See you next time.